Welcome to episode 111.
No Room for Phoning.
And we're actually looking at another book worth reading called Why Has Nobody Told Us This Before? And it's by Dr. Julie Smith. And she sets it up like she has like on dark places, on motivation, on emotional pain. So she goes through like a lot of different like mental health kinds of situations that we encounter as people, and she talks about them. So we're just going to
highlight the different sections of the book without going into too much detail about her examples. And just because it was a really useful book, and indeed the title really matches Why Has Nobody Told Us This Before? Despite all the reading that we've done in the area of self-help and growth, there were still lots of new truths or kind of reminders about things that, why didn't anybody tell us this before?
Right. So the first place that she starts is called On Dark Places, and she writes several chapters really about low mood. And
it was interesting how she uses the term low mood instead of depression.
Yes.
Because she really wants to distinguish between like clinical depression and she really wants to distinguish between clinical depression and, the average.
What is a natural part of it being a human being?
Right.
Is that your mood is not fixed. And it doesn't really define who you are. It's a sensation, but that it's also not all in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in your body state, in your relationships, in your living conditions, in your lifestyle. It's about what you don't do and don't do in your diet, in your thoughts, your movements, your memories. And how you feel is just not simply like a product of your brain.
No, the way you feel influences the types of thoughts that you pop into your head, and they make you more vulnerable to experiencing thoughts that are negative and self-critical. And low mood really gives you the urge to do things that make the mood worse.
Yes. So, and she's trying to just normalize the idea of mood fluctuation. So just because you're feeling a low mood doesn't mean that you're depressed. And because nobody is happy all the time, but we don't have to be at the mercy of it either. There are things that we can do to help. And her idea is that feeling down is more likely to reflect unmet needs than some kind of brain malfunction like depression or something, right?
That's why I think she distinguishes, and our emotions are constructed through a number of things that we can actually influence. We cannot directly choose our emotions and switch them on, but we can use the things we can control to change how we feel.
So thoughts, behaviors, emotions, physical sensations all impact our mood, and they can keep us stuck. And if we take kind of that stance of curiosity and understand the common biases that exist within ourselves, like overgeneralizing and mind reading, and when they appear, and understand like everything you think and feel is not a fact. And sometimes you need to give yourself some distance and then see things for what they really are. And she's obviously not the only one who's ever said that. I've read that in a lot of different places where you have to take a step back and, really determine whether something is a fact or not. And there's this, I think it's a TikTok thing where somebody says, "Oh, are you in a bad mood today? Have you drunk water? Have you exercised? Have you been outside?
Have you gone? Yeah.
Right. Have you done all these things?" And the person says no. And I think that's what she's talking about when she says, what you choose to do can also influence your mood.
And you don't have to worry about being perfect. It's a lot simpler to keep the changes in your life small and sustainable, and commit to practicing some self-compassion and use strategies that help you move forward and make good decisions.
And that whole idea of it doesn't have to be the perfect thing. It just has to be a step forward and not being stuck. So, You don't have to take on the whole idea of like major exercise, 7 days a week. You can just say, oh, I'm going to choose to go on a 10-minute walk this morning, or I'm going to, go to bed a little bit earlier, choose to read. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to do some things as part of my routine. I'm going to make a point to call someone and go out for coffee. Those are all things that elevate your mood, but you don't have to go to an extreme. You don't have to start a book club in order to elevate your mood.
No.
So the next chapter she talks about is called On Motivation.
And this one was new to me because basically we're not born with motivation. We don't always feel energized or wanting to do something. But instead we master motivation by building capacity to do what matters most to us. Even when part of us doesn't really feel like doing it, especially if it can benefit our health.
So interesting, she defines procrastination is just an avoidance of stress or discomfort. So we put off things that cause us stress or dysfunction. And then this anhedonia.
I think it's anhedonia.
Anhedonia is when we no longer get a sense of pleasure from activities that we used to enjoy. And that can just be like low mood or depression or something that causes that, can cause that to happen.
And then we kind of slip out of motivation.
Yes. So physical movement, like staying connected to your goals, small and consistent moving forward, learning to rest and replenish between stressful situations, and avoiding change, not avoiding shame, not change.
Yeah.
Like
all of those activities change our relationship with failure.
And then
that helps us
improve our motivation. So you practice acting in opposition to urges and in line with your values. So, instead of I'll give you an example today. Like we went out for breakfast. It was really nice. I came home. I didn't really want to work out, but I felt like I wanted to. So I acted in opposition to my urge, which was to sit and do nothing. And I've repeated exercising enough that it is a habit for me. And when I was done, I had a cinnamon bun.
That's great.
Because that's a reward.
And for me, I really didn't feel like doing work that I needed to do for my job, which I rarely have to do on the weekends. But this time I really have to do it. So I just jumped in and did it. And it really felt good to click on that send for that last email.
So you need to remember to reward yourself for those times when you resist that urge to do nothing, but you actually step forward and do what you need to do. And when you want to make a big change, be ready to be honest with yourself about how you contribute to the problem or how you keep yourself stuck. So, that's probably hard. That's hard to do because you can also easily make lots of excuses for yourself. Well, I had a big day. I'm tired. Yesterday I did a lot. So today I'm not going to do anything. And that's okay some of the time. But if it's all the time, then you're stuck and you have to be honest with yourself.
I think it's a good idea at the end of the day as you're winding down to reflect back. And, if you've made an excuse versus, made a decision about something, you can kind of think it through and be honest with yourself. Was it just an excuse or was it a legitimate reason that I had to do something different?
Yeah. And I do want to say that in the book, there's lots of journal prompts and also questions for reflection, as well as sections that say, try this, and toolkits. So every chapter has that at the end of it. Yeah. So
it's very practical that way.
So the next chapter she does is on emotional pain. And, she talks about the fact that emotions are neither your enemy or your friend. And we have more influence over our emotional state than we have ever been taught to believe.
Yeah. And I think it's a product of Anglo-Saxon culture and North American rugged individualism, where we think that we just need to squash that emotion down and not let it show.
But like pushing emotion away is not the answer, but letting like the comparison or the kind of the picture that she gives and other people have given as well, as it's like a wave that washes over you. So there's the big crest of the wave, but then it levels out, right? And again, the same thing, emotions are not facts. They are one possible perspective. So that idea of curiosity about your emotions and asking questions, your feelings are not who you are.
And she says, you are not your feelings and they are not who you are. But I think the danger is we can use that sentence, I am not my feelings, and squelch them down.
Yes.
Rather than, okay, I actually need to explore every way that I'm feeling and ride that through till it dissipates.
Which, Elise, is exactly. Emotions tell us what we need. They label your emotions with more detail than just happy or sad. And we've talked about that. And there's actually a wheel in the book that shows a whole bunch of different emotions.
Actually, all you have to do is Google the wheel of emotions and you'll find an image of it all broken down.
And
the other good resource is the mood meter, that poster that I have in my office.
Yes.
That has all those different vocabulary words for emotions so that you're not stuck on the three most.
And she just says to build your emotional vocabulary. And then she goes into this whole thing about how can you help someone else. Don't focus on fixing, focus on listening with kindness, compassion, and curiosity. And then you need to learn about any diagnosis that a person might have. And then just the kind of thing of asking what they need and kind of like prioritizing. You can get caught up in someone who is emotionally dramatic all the times, and that does cause burnout. So you have to set boundaries. And this is my favorite one because I did this all the time when I was a teacher and principal. For kids that struggled, I had a crisis plan for them and we wrote it down. And
so sometimes they just walk down the hallway and they got to come to the office and say hi and have a break.
Yes, and sometimes they were quite intense, some of these crisis plans.
Mm-hmm.
They involved all kinds of different things. But I'm just saying when when you're with somebody who is like on this emotional roller coaster all the time and a lot of things are happening, you have to have some strategies set out for how to manage that. And sometimes it is just a walk. And
I suppose if you're their support person, when there isn't drama, it's a good time to kind of talk out the crisis plan and write it down for the two of you to refer to when the crisis starts.
Like go get your journal and, write free write for 10 minutes when you're really feeling emotionally overwhelmed. Or, there's all kinds of things that can be written into a crisis plan. So, I mean, asking open questions and avoiding offering advice and, seeking professional help if you feel the person is really feeling hopeless or helpless. And then the idea that, being practical by, giving them food and all those kinds of things. And knowing somebody's triggers if they've gone through a big trauma, knowing what their triggers are. And sometimes you just need to change the subject. Like, you don't need to talk about it every single minute all the time.
Yeah, people want like a break
from their own. And just remembering that healing and recovery is not linear. So there's going to be good and bad days. And to be getting to the point where you are being open and honest and asking somebody, is this actually helping you?
Yeah. And you yourself, if you're in emotional pain, you might feel overwhelmed or inadequate. And it's just that rush to get back to happiness, I think, that puts us under pressure. And we really don't have to fix everything at every single stage of the journey through the pain.
No. I mean, it's more like, traveling on a river rather than, you can't dam it up and be done with it. You've got to just keep going. You got to keep going. So her next section is called On Grief.
And it's not only about losing a loved one. Any kind of ending that feels significant can trigger a grief reaction. Even, so not necessarily just death, but yeah.
It's just a normal part of being human, and the pain can feel, emotional and physical.
And the things that help grief don't necessarily make the pain disappear or force you to let go.
I always say that you move forward, you don't move on from something that is, causes grief. And trying again, like emotions, trying to completely block out grief leads you to even actually more problems further down the line. And, sometimes denial can help us survive the overwhelming pain of the grief. Like, I mean, I don't know that it was necessarily denial, but I remember like going through like my mom's funeral and all the stuff that went with it, which wasn't very pleasant because of some family members and things. But I was almost in denial about what was happening. Not that she had died, but the behavior of some of the people. So it helped me like survive that moment. But then when that faded, there were like new waves of then I almost began the process of grieving the loss of my mother.
She refers to the research that was done in the 60s about like the 5 stages of grief, and she says, there's been enough research since then that shows that those 5 stages really aren't linear, and that it's cyclical and actually kind of in all different directions. It's not always the exact same one after the other. And denial is one of them, but, as well as anger and bargaining. And
yeah, it's all there, but it comes and goes at different times, right? And I mean, I like the fact that she says depression is a normal reaction after a bereavement. So, you don't necessarily have to say now I am like diagnosed with depression. You can say right now I am feeling depressed because this horrible thing happened, which doesn't mean that now you're saddled with having depression for the rest of your life.
No.
I think that that's where we get confused.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm not a doctor, but I think that's where the medical community sometimes is quick to drug people.
Yes, because
in grief.
Instead of saying, no, it's normal for you to be sad and whatever, now we're going to mask your feeling of sadness.
And then when you come off of it.
And sometimes then people can never come off of it because then they have to deal with what they were masking when it is a normal reaction. And acceptance is not the same as liking or agreeing with the situation.
And then she goes over some tasks for mourning. And for example, finding some acceptance in the new reality of loss, working through the pain and grief, and adjusting to an environment in which someone or something is missing.
Finding a way to keep a connection with what you have lost in a new way while moving forward with life as it is now. And I remember it's funny because I just saw this, her name was Amanda, and she was a youth counselor, and she was actually really good at that. Like she would create these little memory boxes and books with kids who had lost a grandparent or a parent. And even if they hadn't died, like even if there was just separation or whatever, she did a lot of that. And it really did help because grief demands that we work through pain, and it takes time, and it's okay to feel whatever you feel. And it's just kind of like small steps and steady progress. It's kind of like motivation again, right?
The next point, there is no correct way to express grief, reminds me a bit of my mom when she lost my grandma. She was asking different people, well, how should I grieve? How should I do this?
And she actually asked me that, which was funny because I had literally lost my mom of 57, like 2 weeks before she lost her mother of 101. And I obviously was pretty...
You were the wrong person.
That person. And I just said, well, if you aren't like feeling it, like you don't have to go looking for grief. It kind of comes and finds you. So like if you have to ask me,
then
like
maybe you don't need to.
like maybe, and I mean that was not the right answer at
No.
the time, but it was, and they, her line is that life can be rebuilt after loss with time and work and persistence. And I think that's what I think we get the time part, but I think we forget about the work and persistence that goes into rebuilding after you've had a very either a traumatic thing that's happened to you or an actual death or loss. So, and then
the next section was on self-doubt.
and she's really talking there about learning the skills to deal with criticism and disapproval in a healthy way. That is a crucial life skill because we are built to care what others think of us. So telling ourselves we don't care is not the answer.
And this just goes to our social upbringing for thousands of years. We're part of the village, part of the community, and survival is necessary paying attention to what people think about us is necessary because you want to be accepted in the family, in the village. So that's what we do always.
And I mean, the whole idea of people pleasing, it's more than just being nice to people. It is actually the persistent placing of others' wants or needs above your own, even to the detriment of your own health and well-being. So that is actual what people pleasing means.
Yeah. So people pleasing is a symptom of self-doubt. It's not a healthy.
Yes. And then understanding why some people are highly critical helps you too. Like actually knowing that sometimes it's just not about you.
No, it is their own self-doubt or self-image that is making them be highly critical.
And she talks about nurturing your own self-worth and resilience to shame. And because it's possible to do that and it's life-altering. So she has a learning model called the panic zone, the stretch zone, and the comfort zone.
Can you explain what the panic zone is?
No.
Okay.
That's a point where I would have to go back and look at it.
All right. Sorry.
Because I'm just saying those are, like, the panic zone, I think, is the idea that you're pushed beyond your means.
Right.
But the stretch zone is like the zone of proximal development where you're kind of, yes, I do remember this now. The panic zone is where you're like, it's way too much for you, out of control. But you want to spend most of your time in the stretch zone because that's where you're, pushing yourself a bit, but not too much. And then the comfort zone is where you're sitting and nothing's kind of moving forward. And I love this line. Confidence cannot grow if we are never willing to be without it.
And that's where you have to take that risk and step out, even when you are pretty sure that you're not going to do a great job.
Well, to build confidence, you have to go where you have none and repeat every day and watch your confidence develop. So if you go to the place where you don't have any confidence, then every time you go there, you get more and more. And
Sebastian's going to really like this because yesterday he took us indoor rock climbing, and I discovered I have acrophobia. So now I'm going to have to keep going back to places go back to the rock climbing wall because I have zero confidence so that I can work on becoming more confident with climbing.
Well, and they're saying confidence is situation specific, but what you keep as you move around is the belief that you can tolerate the fear as your confidence grows. So it's almost like, what do they call that? It's kind of a exposure therapy, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to overwhelm yourself with your worst case scenario. You start small and be your own coach, not your worst critic. And then courage, she also says, courage comes before confidence. So, and most self-doubt is linked to the relationship that we have with failure. So if you're so afraid to fail, however do you respond to failure, doesn't say anything about your own personality and worthiness. The sting of failure can drive us to numb or block emotion. So even if we don't initially notice the feeling, you can notice the blocking behaviors. So you have to really focus on coaching yourself into seeing failure as a learning experience. And then you can feel overwhelmed by it all, but you just take your time and get to that point, because if you don't, then you're always doing that people-pleasing thing, right?
It's interesting that people who really, really struggle with low self-confidence are almost so deep in that, I don't know, pit of misery, pit of doom, that they really don't even notice the blocking behaviors. It's almost like they've given up and they feel that this is who they are.
And she talks about the fact that it's a misconception that self-acceptance will cause laziness and complacency and lack of drive. It really develops self-compassion and helps you not feel failure and makes you more likely to to keep doing things when you fail. Because it's not the same as accepting defeat. Self-compassion involves sometimes it involves taking the more difficult road. Because I'll give an example, like when you're setting boundaries with people, that's about self-compassion. But it's not the easiest road.
No, not at all.
Right? So if I say I'm not going to allow that person to do that to me anymore, then you're going to have to set boundaries. Definitely not the easy road. So anyway, her next chapter is called On Fear.
And it is understandable that we want anxiety to disappear. It's supposed to be uncomfortable, but we really don't want it. To fight fear, you must be first willing to face it. And escape and avoidance only provides short-term relief, but it feeds anxiety in the long run.
Our attempts to control fear and eliminate it become the real problem. And so a threat response needs to work fast, so it tends to sound the alarm before you have a chance to think things through in more detail. Like you just rise to that, oh my God, there's a threat, I'm afraid, So when we feel anxious about something, the most natural response is to avoid it, but that makes us more anxious. So just telling your brain that something is safe is not enough. You need to actually experience it to believe it and convince your brain. So you need to repeat the behavior over and over, which is exactly what you were talking about with the climbing gym.
Yeah.
The things that we do most often end up in our comfort zone, which she was talking about before. And so if you actually want to feel less anxious about something, then you do it as often as you can.
And this is what I felt when I was climbing halfway up the wall. My breathing sped up. I was breathing shallowly. My hands got sweaty. I actually started shaking. And I had to just kind of stay there on the wall and breathe deep so that I could move up a couple more steps. But I did kind of reach my top moment, the peak of where I was willing to go. And then I realized that the hardest part was letting go of the wall and sliding.
Yeah, and this is where if you learn to breathe properly, you can actually help yourself get through anxious moments with breathing. And sometimes when we're so anxious, we forget to breathe, right?
Right.
And I like the next section that talks about getting distance from your anxious thoughts. And I think that this kind of happens to people who focus on their anxiety all the time, that they kind of never take a break from anxiety, but you can control where your attention goes. So, instead of being unable to work or unable to do something because of anxiety, you need to actually do something. And then your focus is off of the anxiety.
And then the success gives you that small taste.
Yes, exactly. Kindness turns the dial down on our threat response, whether it comes from someone else or inside your own head. Reframing a threat as a challenge invites you to be courageous. And then she goes back to talking about acting in line with your values so that you're making your decisions based on what matters the most to you and not just on fear or a fear response. So...
And then she ends that section about our collective fear of death. And it's a fear of both the known and the unknown. And for some, coming close to death brings about growth and positive life transformation and acceptance of death. But then some people feel, well, if I'm going to accept death, that's the same thing as giving up on living. And it isn't the same.
No, I've just read a whole book on aging. It's called From Something to Soul. And so that whole idea of actually getting into your inner self in order to, understand more about yourself and accept the parts of life, but it actually brings more meaning to your life, to explore those kinds of things. And then her next section is called On Stress. And she talks about how stress and anxiety are used interchangeably. When we're able to meet the demands of our environment, we tend to feel good, even when it involves some stress. What we feel as stress is when our brain is preparing us to do something. The brain allows the release of energy to increase your alertness and react to your environment. We conceptualize anxiety as more of a fear-based response. So that's kind of the difference. Stress is not always the enemy. It's kind of a tool.
A valuable tool, because it's the brain getting ready.
Yeah. And then we have to remember to replenish after we've had an especially stressful period.
Right. And we have to remember stress helps us to perform and do what matters, but we're not built to be in a constant state of stress. We need stress for a fun and challenging life, but too much and the benefits are lost.
Yeah, it just needs to be short term. Chronic stress is like trying to drive your car on a motorway in second gear. There's only so long before you actually do
some
damage to the car, right? And that's the same thing. And burnout is just not a workplace issue. It happens when there is a chronic mismatch between the individual and control, not being able to meet the demands you're faced with, not feeling valued, the lack of positive kind of human interaction and support, and not having needs met or some kind of perceived inequality. And also when demands are in direct conflict with your personal values. If that keeps happening, you're going to feel burned out. You have to fix something in that mix.
Yeah. It reminds me of that documentary we watched last night, Fair Play, where the burnout is happening to so many women that have those, what's it called? The silent job.
It's the overload of your brain, right? Where you're trying to do all these things. It's just a chronic mismatch between what you can do as an individual and then all not feeling valued and not having support and not on this inequality. It's a very good documentary, especially for younger families, like people with younger families.
There is no silver bullet that works for everything with stress. What the right balance is for one person is maybe unrealistic for another.
And she also gives the sort of what happens when you're under chronic long-term stress, disturbed sleep and changes in appetite and difficulty concentrating, headaches, dizziness, like muscle pain, tension, stomach problems, sexual problems, addiction. So there are some really serious, and I was talking about this before, but changing something as simple as how you breathe impacts your stress. And she talks about meditation, which is another significant way of dealing with stress.
Connecting with others helps us recover from stress. Social isolation puts the mind and body under great stress. Even though sometimes we feel that we want to withdraw.
Yeah, no.
It's actually aggravating.
Yeah, it aggravates. Our goals founded in contribution rather than competition help us stay motivated and persevere under stress as well. And she also talks about seeking out experiences of awe to shift your perspective. And I mean, I think it's funny to say it this way, but sometimes just going and being around Charlotte and Mason, there's awe to that, right? Because they are just so full of life and interesting. And so it doesn't
when a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, the curiosity plus the way they explain the world around them.
Yeah. But I mean, so I'm just not saying you don't have to go to Mount Kilimanjaro to be awed. You can actually just engage with your community and with the people around you and talk to them and, and start like seeing life through their eyes. And I think that especially little people, and that does develop like a sense of awe.
And I think even, sorry, this is more of a alone type activity, is take a magnifying glass and go out in nature and look up close at things.
Yeah.
I think that really, yes, we're amazed by mountains and
right
and things, but also looking at the small and the tiny.
And I mean, how we think about it in your own brain affects how you perform under stress as well. Like you see people walking around whom, and sometimes under my perception, really don't have that much stress. Oh, I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. Well, seeing stress as an asset that will help you enables you to spend less energy trying to squash the feelings. And instead of like just focusing on the demands and focusing on what to do rather than what not to do, and, adjusting your focus to adjust the stress level, right? And I mean, I used to say to the kids, when they were stressed out about an essay or an assignment or something, so just create a backwards timeline and then you won't be as stressed because you'll have a plan.
I'm finding just in communicating with people now, I'm trying to avoid two words. I'm busy and I'm stressed.
Yeah, that idea, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so busy.
Well, I just don't want to use either one because it's become a status symbol.
Yeah.
And I'm just, nope, don't want to go down that path.
Yeah, no. And I mean, everybody's busy in their own way, like whatever. And then her final chapter is just called On a Meaningful Life. And she says, we are often sold the idea that happiness is the norm and anything outside of that could be a mental health problem. Sometimes we are not happy because we are human and life is difficult, and things that make life worthwhile bring us more than happy feelings. They bring us a mix of happiness, love, joy, fear, shame, and hurt at times too. So everything that makes life what it is more than just happiness. And that goes back to us labeling our feelings with more than just happy and sad. And then
and when you have more than 100 words for different levels of emotions and different nuances between them, it goes to show that we experience them because we've come up with the words for them.
Yeah. And she gives a whole bunch of things about like on how to get clarity on your personal values and some simple exercises that you can do. And she also reminds us that values do change over time. But when we use our values to guide our goal setting, then it's easier for us to like work day to day because you know what's important to you and you know what attitude you want to face life with, kind of no matter what happens.
Yeah, so when we decide it's time for a change, there can be a tendency, this is me, to come up with a huge radical new goal. And simply having a goal is not enough to ensure your life changes and stays changed.
So she talks about visualizing the person that you want to be and creating those concrete, sustainable actions that actually, move you forward, and linking your intentions to your sense of identity shows the new behaviors to continue. They'll continue way beyond sort of the initial goal.
Yeah, and they have interviewed lots of individuals in their last months or days of life and asked them, what do they regret? And it comes down to a happy life. Relationships beat money, fame, social class, and all the things that we're told to put our effort into.
Our relationships and how happy we feel them are not separate from our overall health. They're kind of the core of the equation. So working on the self helps your relationships, and working on your relationships helps the self. It's cyclical. And she does this whole thing about attachment styles in early life that are reflected in our adult relationships. So if you have been through a traumatic childhood of any kind, looking at those attachment styles would be very interesting and it would be very good for you. And the best time to seek support for your mental health is any time you become concerned about it. If you are not sure how much you need, usually if you can find a good professional, they can help you decide. And, she talks about the fact that in an ideal world, therapeutic services would be available to everyone, but we don't have an ideal world. So,
So some of it is just taking every opportunity you can yourself to learn and to read and to discuss with friends. It's just not limited to a professional.
Well, and if you get the wrong professional, sometimes you can go down. And I will tell you that for me, I obviously read a ton of books like this because I have no shortage of books to bring up at Books Worth Reading. But
well, we took these kinds of self-help books on our honeymoon. We've always done it.
Yeah, we've always looked at things like this. But some things I read in books, I go, oh, no, like that does not fit me at all. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. The reason you read a variety of things and get a variety of perspectives is because something is going to fit what you're feeling and what you're going through. One book is not going to be the answer.
Right. And speaking of books worth reading, on May 15th, we're going to move on to the next book.
Making Judgments Without Being Judgmental, Nurturing a Clear Mind and a Generous Heart by Terry D. Cooper. It's a very good book.
I'm looking forward to reading it over the next couple.
Yeah, you actually read the book this time, eh?
I did. I've read
a lot of books. I'm just teasing you. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on No Room for Phonies.
Episode 111.
Why has nobody told me this before?